If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today, I'm joined by Sofia Smati, a performance coach at Red Bull's Athletic Performance Center in Los Angeles, where she works with elite athletes across skateboarding, esports, soccer, and more. A former high-level athlete herself, Sofia brings an evidence-based but refreshingly human approach to training. In this episode, we get real about what it means to coach women at the highest level, why individual needs, not gender, should drive programming, and how to simplify training in a world obsessed with complexity. If you're tired of the noise
it is my honor
and
to
ready
welcome
for
to the show
honest,
Sofia Smati.
experience-backed
Sofia is
insights
an
into
elite
female
athletic
performance,
coach.
this one's for
She's
you.
a former high-level
Let's dive in.
athlete, and she's a rising leader in high-performance sport. She's worked with men and women at every level and produced unbelievable outcomes. Sofia, welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. Hi, Jeremy. Hi, Michelle.
We are so thrilled to have you here. We're following this up, Sofia, with an episode that we just recorded with Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. In the world of women's fitness right now, there are so many messages being put out there. And they're driven through this lens of women have different responses to cortisol. Women need to eat at very specific times relative to their training. Women need to change their training based on their cycle. Everything you can imagine being thrown at women right now. And so we went through and debunked a lot of that with Dr. Lauren. And now we're really excited to have you as a coach, somebody who's actually training women and actually producing very high level outcomes, to come in. And it's just so we can talk about what it takes to create outcome in an athlete in general, man or woman. So I'd love to start with that. You know, you've seen both sides of this. You've played very high level sport. Now you're coaching. Will you share some of the differences or whether there are any between the men and the women that you coach?
Yeah, I think. Well, let's start with I'm sharing my perspective, and I've listened here so many different opinion about this, and I think for me is as a coach and my experience, I've been always asked how is it different to coach a male and a female. And my answer, it's always been the same, is I don't coach gender. I coach an athletes, and I'm going to adapt based on the individual, not based on the gender. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing that I think that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting perspective and an important one. That was something in my experience. When I was at UCSB, we had hundreds of female athletes that would come in. And they would come in fed, fasted. They would come in before training, after training. They'd come in the morning or the evening, really under all sorts of different circumstances. When women's volleyball or men's volleyball were coming in, I was training them for volleyball. So the important thing was the goal and the outcomes that we needed for them to play volleyball at the highest level. It wasn't, oh, the women are coming in, what do I need to do differently?
Yeah, I will agree with you. I think just going back to the basics of how do you train athletes and how do you get to that outcome, how do you achieve adaptation, and then going back to understanding the athletes, the lifestyle, the social, cultural aspect of it, the stress, kind of just the performance overall. I don't know about the menstrual cycle. today there's not enough evidence to say that they should be adapting the training. I have a female athlete that might perform better when she's on the menstrual cycle based on her feedback, and I might have another athlete that might feel a little bit tired. So it's very individual. It will be hard to really put that in a framework for every female athlete.
Yeah, I think that's again when we look at the goal and we have the individual who comes in, male or female. I think the challenge is it's what is that individual person's limiting factor to get to their goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's going to be so much variety in each individual's physiology. As you know, we know as coaches, we're way more different as individuals than as men and women as it pertains to pursuing a goal. And I think a lot of this research coming out of basically animal studies is doing a disservice to women and sort of framing them in a sort of a fragile light. So I think that it's something that I know you see with the women that come in to your facility. They're pretty far from fragile, right?
Yeah, they are pretty far from fragile. I think that we have to be careful for it depends on the athlete, but we have to be careful what information we give to the athletes. We are the practitioner, we are the expert. We have to make sure that we give them the right information. There's so much information out there. When you have an athlete that comes in with all this different information at the same time, how do you kind of focus and cut that noise out of it just to really focus on what is important, and how do you get to the outcome? And I have plenty of example with athletes where every time they come in and they say, "Oh, I've seen this on social media. I've listened to that person." It is really challenging for a coach just to make sure that the athlete is just focusing on the right thing because of that.
Yeah. And so if you've been in that seat though, right? You've been the athlete, right? You've been the one that's training for the sport. What sort of inputs did you feel? What did you experience going through that as a female athlete in your own training?
In terms of the menstrual cycle, or just being like a
No, I mean
female
just
athlete in
training
the
for your
stadium.
sport. Like what was your experience of that? Were you tracking menstrual cycle? Were you looking at when you ate protein? Were you looking at a
No,
man's versus a woman's program? Like how did
no,
all of that shape out for
no.
you?
I mean, 15 years ago, even 15 to 20 years ago, I'm playing soccer, I'm playing football in Europe, and we just want to have fun. We play a high level, but we just want to have fun. We're just kids. We don't have all this information. So I grew up playing with boys. Grew up playing with boys the whole time, and I shifted to women's soccer a little bit later on.
Mhm.
So obviously there was no question about she's female, she should be training in a different aspect. I was training with the boys. In terms of all the information about protein, nutrition, sleep, I didn't have access to that back in the days. We still perform. I've traveled a lot. We've talked about this a few times where I go to Asian countries, and the culture is so interesting to me because they don't have all this technology. They don't have a nutritionist, a mental performance, a strength conditioning coach, a physical. No, they don't have all of that. They can still achieve the outcomes that they want. Why is that? And I think they
That's
just stick to the basic of training, be consistent, try to have a pretty healthy nutrition and sleep, but they don't know what that means in
yeah.
terms of metrics.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. When we start tracking all of these metrics and we start telling people that they have to train, you mentioned a couple of really important things there. Consistency of training and doing the basics, the fundamental things that are the most important building blocks of your program. We really have to focus on building consistency. And if it's so confusing and it's so complex, how can we continue to build that consistency into our programs?
Yeah, I think we just have to keep it really simple. If I was an athlete back in the days and I have all this information, let's be honest, I would not follow any of it. All I wanted to do is play soccer. That's it. So I do think there's a lot of information that we give to athletes, a lot of data that we give to the athletes, but we just, sometimes it could be overwhelming for them. So how do we, how do you keep it simple? And I think that's what we're trying to achieve at the high performance level.
Yeah, that was something that I said to people all the time when I'm working with professionals, whether it was NBA, NHL, Major League Soccer. There's what we need to know as the support staff. But your athletes, they're not nutrition majors or exercise science students. At every level, they just want to play their sport.
Mm-hmm.
And buy-in is about how do we translate all of that data and all of the science and everything we understand into this is going to help you with your sport.
Right.
Are there lessons that you have taken or things that you know now as a coach that you would like to have known back then when you were playing?
Ooh. I think so. I think the main thing is understanding the why. Why are we doing the lifting? How is that going to actually impact my performance? I lifted in college, and I hated it, to be honest. And I think that's surprising that now I'm a strength and conditioning coach because I didn't know the why. We're just lifting.
Right.
I was feeling super sore on game days. I hated that feeling. And so I think I wish I had that information.
So how do you translate that now for your athletes? How does lifting improve your athletes' performance?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the sport, right? But let's take an example. Very different example because I'm a Red Bull. So let's take an example of the skaters. I've never trained skaters in the past, skateboarders. So I'm talking to the athlete and trying to get some feedback to understand, watch the videos, and he's telling me I want to increase my pop. What does that mean, right? So we do the profiling and looking at the metric of the drop jump or a single leg hops, and we kind of compare with all the skateboarders that we have across Red Bull, and we can see that there's a deficit there compared to the peers. So now I'm taking that metric, I'm watching how he's skating and implementing that in the gym and explaining how that metric and how that movement, that power movement and be reactive and having a stiff ankle is going to help you get that pop. And when you explain that to them, it makes sense, right? So I think that's really trying to relate to their sports. They don't care about the data. They care if you talk their language.
Talk us through, speaking of language, talk the listeners through the tests you just described to us. So there's the drop jump. What is that?
Drop jump. So we can do a single leg or double leg drum jump. We are really looking at you can look at different metrics, right? But I think the thing that we're looking at is the reaction of how strong and quick and powerful can you drop from a higher step, hitting the ground and jumping back up. So do your reactive strength index
Right, so it's how quick you can hit the ground and get back up in the
and
air.
bounce back up as quick
Right.
as possible, with a short amount of time on the floor and a big jump high if
Yeah.
possible.
And so you can see for a skateboarder who's going to be landing on that board has to come up, perform whatever movement they're going to perform. They have to be able to produce a lot of force in a short amount of time.
Right.
And I think that's the important thing that people need to understand. When we're training, it's not to be tired. It's we can train that trait. Right? We can help you through being stronger, through being more powerful, be able to hit the ground, jump higher, be able to perform the movement more easily.
Yeah, right. And this is one of the metric. Obviously, the calf is such a huge important role for skateboarders, but I'm taking that as an example.
Sure.
And I think it's just really looking at what are the deficit and what is the gap to really get to that demand of that competition. We have the Olympics coming up, and so how do you, or just actually just finish, and we have the LA 28 coming up. If there's a gap in between, how do you get to that level in terms of strength and power in the ankle?
And let me relate that really quick to our general population audience. What I want you to pay attention to is what Sofia just said about what is the demand, where are you now, and how do we take you to that demand? It doesn't matter if you're an Olympic skateboarder, if you're an Olympic sprinter, a rugby player, or if you're trying to train for golf, if you're trying to train for pickleball. The demand is the demand that's going to be placed on your body. Your current strength, power, stability levels, fitness levels are what matter relative to that demand. So the importance of training for anyone who wants to participate in an activity is how do we close that gap and make that a safe activity for you and be able to perform it at a really high level. And you've done that with everyone from high school athletes all the way through the pros now, right? And so what are the similarities you've seen at all of those levels?
They're very similar. I think, when you go, and for me, I'm training in athletes, and as you said, I've trained at the youth level, professional level, even look, just the general population, older people. I think one of my oldest athletes, I still call him an athlete, was 92 years old.
Right.
And the youngest one that I've trained was 11 years old. So, and in between you have pros and D1 athletes. So you really have a variety of range in sports and goals. The way you approach it is very similar. My 92-year-old athletes and my high school athletes, they have goals, right? How do you get to those goals? They're not the same goals, obviously,
Right.
but my 92-year-old athlete that wants to be able to do 10 squats and be able to hold his cup and just little things like that. And you have my youth athletes, or let's take my softball athletes who's now playing for Notre Dame, trying to make it to that level, and she's training for the US trial. The main thing is going to be the consistency of training. How do I get the stimulus and the adaptation for them, and how do I, on a weekly or monthly, how do I progress them to get to that level?
And I think that's an important point there, Sophia. Again, one that's really critical for people to take away is the progress. Right, we talked about bone density with Dr. Belinda Beck. We talked again with Dr. Lauren, Stu Phillips, and now you're saying the same thing as everyone else. We have to progress the level at which we're working in order to close that gap to the goal. And that adaptation is going to be really, really important. And the progress of doing just a little more than you were able to do.
Yeah, and how do you know when they're ready to progress, right? So for me,
How do you?
I keep it simple. To be honest, I'm talking to the athletes. I'm asking, out of 10, the RPE is a big one. When we reassess, we can see the trend of, are they actually getting stronger, or are we kind of like staying at the same, are they, we just, we hitting a plateau, which happens sometimes. I've seen that even at the highest level. And so how do we kind of switch that and move the needle to make sure that over a period of time, there's still a progression?
Can you explain RPE? That was one of the metrics you just mentioned in there.
Yeah, RPE, to keep it simple, is from 0 to 10, how challenging was the workout. 0 being the easiest and 10 being the hardest workout of your life. And I'll ask that, I'll ask some questions when they come in, athletes, and also when they leave the session. So the question that come when they come in is, how fatigued do you feel? How well did you sleep last night? How sore are you today? And also, from a mental point, is, how you stressed today? How do you feel? Right? I think one of the main key that we kind of forget to ask the athlete is like your social life, what's going on in your life, right? And that can impact the performance either way.
Yeah, and that RPE being rate of perceived exertion, I think that's the important metric for when you're progressing. Right? We ask our people to sort of, I want you to maybe, if we're doing 12 reps, maybe you could get two more. If we stay at that level, we keep lifting and we're consistent, that RPE will start out at about an 8 out of 10. At some point, if we keep lifting, that same weight will be a 7 out of 10. And then it'll be a 6 out of 10. And so we want to increase the weight or the number of reps and bring it back to an 8. Is that how you're thinking about that, even at the highest level with athletes?
I've seen both. So yes, and also I've seen athletes where so RP is based on each individual. So some people have a higher tolerance, some people have a lower tolerance. So have had athletes that they always tell me like my RP is a 5 or 4, right? To me personally, if it's a 4 or 5, I don't think it's high, right? But over a period of time, it stays at 4 and 5. And when you know that they go just a little bit above, like a 5 or 6, you know that it's significant improvement, right? Or if it goes a little bit below. So I think it depends. You just have to remember that the RPE is very individual,
Yeah.
and you have to track it over time to kind of make it make sense.
And that's an interesting point, because for people starting lifting as well, they don't necessarily know what a 10 is.
Yeah.
Right? A 10 out of 10 for somebody who's never lifted weights before could look very, very different than a very experienced lifter. So I think that there is a factor in there of actually learning how to understand your body, how to understand your capacity, and really coaching people through what they are capable of and how possible it is for them to make progress.
Right. Yeah, I think as coach, you have to do a really good job of explaining what does that mean from 0 to 10 since day one. Otherwise, you can get a little bit confused throughout the workouts.
Yeah. Yeah. And from exercise to exercise, it could be different, I guess. And
Yeah.
then the whole workout, you have a really difficult phase and then a really easy bit. And so I
Yeah.
think it can be a big challenge for athletes to really, or I'll say more for general population, to really dial that in.
Yeah. And then I think this is just one metric that it's not going to be the decision maker, but it's one piece of tools that we can use to adapt the training if we need to.
What are some of the examples that you have of helping people express their potential, of really understanding that process, that maybe they can move on? They don't necessarily think they can. They think they're working hard,
Yeah.
but they got to take that next step. Because I know you've trained some really interesting people with Red Bull, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's
gamers and skateboarders who don't have a long history of weight training.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you asked that because this morning I was training a e-gamer, and this week he just PR on his bench press and then his tripod deadlift, and we kind of talked about it, and I think for him because he's not used to training heavy lifting, he think that just doing more than he used to be is just enough, but we are encouraging him to push it in a safe environment is important. We build that trust in the first place. I think it's important to build a trust with your athletes, especially the one that don't spend much time in the gym. And once you do that, you can really move the needle and push them in the way that you want to. I think when you work with esports athletes, for example, a lot of it is cognitive training, but also I train the full body. So understanding and teaching them when you should add some weight and when you should kind of stay in the same weight. So the way that I'll do it for them is looking at rest, the reps in reserve, and let's say if you have 5, 6 more reps in the tank, let's try to increase a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We did a segment the other day on the demands of sitting on the body, because a lot of our people we work with now, we call them cognitive athletes. It'd be very similar to an e-gamer. people who are on Wall Street and in industries that force them to sit and focus for a long time, sitting's amazingly demanding on the body. Just being in a static posture all the time. How have you found lifting to help these e-gamers?
I think going back to my experience with general population and people that coming that work in the office all day and have lower back pain, neck pain, postural dysfunction, it's similar for e-gamers. So they might have a really sharp brain, but they feel stiff on the hip flexor. They're having some, neck is bothering me, my shoulder, and kind of have trying to create a better lifestyle and habit for them. And that goes back a little bit to longevity. The body is not meant to be seated in a position for 10 to 12 hours playing games. So how do you get out of those positions to just make sure you stay healthy and have a healthy lifestyle? The benefit that I've seen with esports is, and also the feedback that they gave me, was that just creating a warm up and exercise right before game can even help them focus even better. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's something that is fascinating. The impact on the brain of exercise. It's something we focus on a lot with our clients for long-term brain health, avoiding cognitive decline, but then also performance within their roles. I think it's just it's such an important piece. One of the things I'd like to touch on is the people that come through Red Bull's Performance Center. And you recently had Sail GP, as we come back around to our female training paradigm. One of the things that's fascinating is that one of the members of the team was female. And she happened to be in one of the hardest positions to be on the team as a female. And it's that theme we touched on earlier of women's resilience and the amount of work capacity they have in the weight room being so underestimated. I'd love for you to talk about her a little bit.
Yeah. So we had a great camp last year, and they actually came back this year. That was my first time meeting the whole team. So I've personally worked with that person over the summer, but I've never met the whole team. So when she mentioned about, oh, it's all male, I'm just around male all the time, it kind of reminds me of me in my environment. But seeing that in person really was very interesting, and see how she interact with them. And so when they come in, we do the onboarding, the profiling, all the assessment. And that person is the only female grinder in the CLGP USA. So it just tells a lot about how strong and resilient she is. So then we run through the battery of tests. When it's important to mention is that when we test the athletes, obviously you have the raw data, but you also have your relative strength, and this is really comparing to your body weights. So we want to make sure we compare apples to apples. So when we do that with the athletes and all the male athletes, she is either at or above average compared to the male athletes in terms of power and strength. Like we're talking about power and strength, right?
Right.
And does it matter to a certain degree? Yes and no, because I think comparing apple to apple, you can just show that she's either at or even stronger than the male in the league. But when she's competing, obviously it doesn't really matter because she still has to compete against all the male athletes. But it was very, it was really impressive to see that, and just the way she trains, and she's a beast.
I was gonna ask what stood out about her being in the gym outside of these testing numbers. What stood out from her just demeanor and her coming in through the weight room?
She trains harder than all of her teammates. She's the one that comes more often to the APC throughout the year. She trains hard all the time. And I think that mindset is just very inspiring.
That's something that I saw as well. At the college level, you have male and female on basically every sport. And I can say, without exception, the female side of the sport always were better to work with than the male side of the sport. Every single team. The commitment to their training,
Right.
how hard they worked, and their capacity for work was higher.
Yep.
So absolute weights lifted were different. Outcomes may have been different. But I would often describe when women's volleyball would walk into our gym, they would walk in and baseball would be in there. And I remember distinctly one day, the baseball team, they had their iPod on. I think that was actually before iPods. So they had their music playing. And it was like whatever pop music. They had like Lady Gaga on or something. And the captain of the women's volleyball team came in, unplugged their music, plugged in some like hardcore music, and it's like this dark cloud descended on the weight room. They just came in and just started like lifting the same weights as all these baseball players, jumping on bigger boxes, and it was just so impressive.
Yeah.
And I think that's what stood out to me. And as this messaging started coming out recently about women need to be doing all this really complicated stuff, it needs to be totally different, it made me look back and think, like, hang on, was I missing something? When SailGP comes through the APC, does she have a women's program versus the men's program? Is it a different program?
No, there's no different program. The program is very individual based on what they need, but it's not a female male program. I will agree with you. I do think that from my experience, especially working with youth and a lot of women's soccer, in the gym, they work harder than the male.
Mm-hmm.
That work ethic is a bit different, in my opinion, in my experience.
Yeah, I think it was evident across the board, as I said. Like, we had 500 athletes, half of whom being women, and you've been at the college level as a player, and it was really stark. The only consideration we ever gave was the demands of the sport, was what they need for what they need to do on the field was what drove their program, right? Yes, there was individualization, as you alluded to with SailGP. Like, she might have a different set of needs than the men in terms of where she's at relative to the goal, but she's still got to go out on the same boat as everyone else and perform
And
the same tasks.
Yep,
Right?
and compete against the male.
Good enough to do all of that and compete on a level
Yeah.
playing field, right?
Yeah, she's strong and powerful enough to compete in the male-dominated environment sport, really. So, yeah, I think it's a it's a good question to ask. I think what's coming from is the research is mostly on male, and I will agree that there's more research that needs to be done on female, but the principle of training is just similar. It's the same. It's not different. I think you have to adapt based on all the information that you have on a daily basis, but not on based on menstrual cycle, based on if you're male or female. It's this. None of that is being proven to this day. Maybe in 10 years, 15 years, we're gonna have a different conversation, but today, it's not different at all.
Yeah, and I don't know how it would be. I just think, as you said, you go over to different countries, or if we go way back, as
Yeah.
long as women have been setting world records in sports that they're not an order of magnitude different now than they were. Like world records are broken very incrementally. And so if we've got world records that have been set in the 60s, we weren't doing all this stuff in the 60s. And so I just think that we'll always have to train for the demands of people's sport and look at real outcomes. And how do we create those outcomes? We're going to learn more. We're going to get better at it. Of course we are. But I don't think that those core principles are really going to go away.
No, I don't think those principles will go away. I think there'll be more studies about around the female and around the menstrual cycle. It's a big hype right now. There's not enough studies to make decisions, but I think there will be more studies about the menstrual cycle. But practically it will be very different. Even if there's some sort of evidence, it will be very different to implement that with the athletes in a team environment.
Yeah, that's where I see it as largely marketing.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody's trying to sell you something, it makes sense for them to make it sound really complicated and like they have an answer for you. And I think it discourages and derails women from training and makes women believe that they can't.
Yeah, and how do you achieve outcomes if you're not consistent again with the training? Just keep it simple.
Correct.
Progressive overload. How do you get strong? Be consistent. Every week try to increase the load, the volume. If your goal is hypertrophy or strength, how do you get that if you don't have that consistency?
Hmm.
So
And talk to me about that. You know, one of the things, and I hear it on just about every podcast now on women's training, the issues that get brought up around women not wanting to get bulky if they lift
yeah.
weights. Is that something that you come across with your athletes even?
Yeah, I've had a couple athletes where they just don't want to get too much upper body, right? I had a street snowboarder that brought it up to me. And that was an interesting point.
Yeah.
From a performance point of view, does she need to be strong in the upper body for what she does? Maybe for injury prevention, if she lands on the shoulder, she needs to be stable and strong. Does she need to be bulky? No, I think it's a personal preference. But also for us, I work in a high performance environment. Is this making you an upper body beast gonna help you perform better? If it's a no, then it's not a priority. But at the same time, it depends how do you train the upper body. You can train the upper body and not get bulky.
Well, and what I would suggest is that how challenging would it be to actually get bulky for a female athlete?
For female, it is. I mean, there's a physiologic differences between male and female in terms of upper body and the mass. So it will be more challenging for a female athlete to get that muscle mass in the
Yeah.
upper body compared to the male. So yes, it will be challenging. She's gonna have to load a lot and also eat a lot just
Yeah.
to make sure that she's getting that muscle mass.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it from my own perspective. Since about the age of 17, I've been actively trying to get as bulky as I could possibly get. I grew up playing rugby.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I've done an okay job of it, but this is what I've got, right? After 20 plus years of lifting as heavy as I can, eating for that specific goal, and I'm not all that bulky, right? Relative to
You're
people
pretty bulky.
relative to people who, you know, like bodybuilders and all these people, if you look on the spectrum. So I think the threat of somebody lifting weights twice a week and eating a diet that has sufficient calories and all the rest of it, the threat of actually getting bulky is pretty small.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand like the if you want to work that muscle mass or the hypertrophy, understand the volume that it takes on a weekly to get to that hypertrophy stimulus, and it's a lot.
Right.
And so lifting twice a week, it's not gonna get you there. You're gonna need to do way more volume for
Yeah.
sure.
So how many days a week are you lifting right now? If we take your program,
My program, I'm lifting 5 days a week.
lifting weights 5 days a week, doing some upper body,
I'm doing upper body a little bit.
and you've not turned into a bodybuilder yet, right?
I mean, no. I could do more, but yeah, no. I haven't. I've always done at least twice a week upper body, and
Yeah.
my program is not designed to, get that stimulus either. So it's more of a strength, and so I'm not worried about this at all.
And that's such a key point, right? You're lifting 5 days a week, right? The program has to be designed for the goal, right? Again, so some people's goal is soccer, some people's is sail GP, other people Other people have the goal of hypertrophy, which is building muscle. If we don't design your program for that, it doesn't happen.
It
Right.
doesn't
And so
happen.
I really want women to take that away from this conversation with somebody who actively trains women to lift weights, is that it's not going to happen to you. Right.
No,
Ultimately.
you can have two female athletes lifting 5 times a week, both of them. The design of the program is going to be different, so you're going to have a different outcome. It goes back to what are we trying to achieve here, and how is it programmed, how is it designed, what's the exercise selection. The lot of things matters to really achieve your goals. And so having more like a general upper body twice a week, it's not going to get you bulky. If you're worried
So
about that, don't worry about being
yeah.
bulky. You're okay.
Just give me a brief overview then of what would it look like if I had a female client who was like, okay, I want to be a bodybuilder,
Mhm.
right? I want to be as bulky as possible. What is she going to have to do to achieve that goal?
I think we're gonna have to do a couple of assessment. One of the main one is gonna be, well, the training, obviously, but the nutrition is gonna be a huge part of that muscle mass, and she's gonna have to, you know, lift a lot of volume, or different ways that you can achieve that muscle mass. So she can either lift with a lot of volume during the week, or she can, have a little bit less volume but a higher load. So they both get you to the hypertrophy. But if you do that throughout the week and you don't eat enough, then how do you get that? So the nutrition and the training, they're both really important. And the recovery, how do you recover from one session to the other so you can optimize that session? Basic of performance training again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. There's options how you want to get there.
Mhm.
You're going to have to be lifting a lot, eating a lot, and we're talking about surplus calories here, right? If you want to gain mass, you have to be eating more than you're burning,
Mhm.
which is a hell of a lot. And then on the recovery, it's more sleeping and more eating, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm taking my brother as an example. He's trying to build his muscle mass. And the first thing that I told him is he's not a gym guy, never been to the gym, but he doesn't eat much at all.
Hmm.
So they both the key, factors for muscle mass. So I created a program for him, and then also kind of helping him with nutrition. Just start with having 3 meals a day with snacks in between. Like that's a great start. Yeah, in the past he's never had 3 meals a day. He just had lunch, a light lunch, and then dinner. So let's start there, because if you give a program right away, someone that has no experience in the gym, and is nutrition is not great, and you give all of it right away, oof, good luck eating that much carbs and protein, and good luck lifting 5 times a week for the first
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So slowly increasing that.
And here's where there is a male female difference. As a young man, he will have approximately 10 times the testosterone that a woman will have. And that really is the key difference between the two in terms of muscle hypertrophy. As
Right.
you explained, pound for pound, your female athletes are as strong or stronger than your male athletes. But the difference comes in being able to build mass and strength. It is testosterone,
Yeah.
right? That's the reason it's monitored at the Olympic level and professional level. And so I think that the the key takeaway for me for women who are worried about getting bulky if they lift weights is you don't have enough testosterone. You're probably not going to be lifting enough to get serious hypertrophy that it would take, and you're probably not going to be able to eat enough. So it's an incredibly challenging thing to go through that process of really becoming bulky.
I think it's a good point. I think the people that are asking you those questions is more general population lifting twice a week, right? just a general program. So I will agree with you.
If you look at sport, again, it all comes back to the goal. What outcomes do we want? And it's the goal, like the female rugby players, they need to add mass.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're lifting a ton and they're eating a ton, they're sleeping, they're recovering, they're doing all the things it takes in order to do that, because that is their express goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so absolutely we can do it. They're not lifting twice a week. Right? And so that's the whole thing. And you know, this doesn't just happen overnight. It isn't an accident. You don't just stumble into waking up in the morning and like, oh my God, look how bulky I got.
Right.
Right. This week's program must have really, thrown me over the edge. This is a deliberate thing that takes years of training, of compounding results and consistency, as you've mentioned several times.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. You wake up one day and you're just like, oh, bulky. That would be amazing.
Oh, me too.
Like twice a week.
Yeah, I've been trying for a long time. Hasn't just happened overnight yet. So, Sophia, that helps us sort of dispel one of the myths that may have come up. When your female athletes do lift, right? We've joked around about the bulking up thing, but what do they experience? So when people come in and they start training, maybe you've got the whole spectrum of people that you work with. What happens within the body as they start building that consistency?
So depends on the athlete, right? So we can take the youth athletes, or we can take the general population, or the professional athletes. Either way, which one do you want to start with?
Well, let's talk about your athletes that you're working with right now.
Yeah. So the athletes I work right now, female athletes, they feel stronger. They feel stronger. They feel more confident. I think it's a good point that we forget to mention is being in a gym environment might be a little overwhelming, especially with this environment. It's like all male boys like turning the music as loud as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And you have someone coming in, so it can be intimidating. I think the thing that I've seen is I feel stronger in the gym, but I can also feel it when I'm doing my sport. I feel more powerful. I can cut harder, jump higher. I feel more confident in my, changing of direction or something a little bit more specific. And yeah, and then you kind of see a side of them that you don't see at the beginning, where they're kind of taking initiative of, all right, I'm going to do this today. I'm going to push today. So I think that's a pretty interesting thing that I've seen with my athletes.
Yeah. Does that translate through those different classifications? So you mentioned general pop and high school athletes. Is that something you see across the board?
Yes, I think sometimes it will take more time for athletes to feel stronger or more confident. It depends on the individual, but overall the results will be very similar. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, we hear that all the time around confidence. And particularly with longevity clients, people who are getting into their 70s and 80s, their confidence around falling.
Yep.
And their confidence around being resilient and playing their sport is transformed as they start getting stronger.
Yep.
We've had a number of people in their 80s who have been able to stop themselves falling if they've tripped. But also people who have actually fallen, who have tripped unavoidably and have been able to catch themselves and not cause any damage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not damage the shoulders, the wrists, not be able to stop themselves and fall and hit their head.
Yeah.
So I think the confidence in longevity really reflects an increase in athleticism. Right?
Yeah.
We're just making people more athletic by helping them lift weights.
Yeah, and have control of your body. I think, like you mentioned, an older person that just falls to the ground and can get up and feels okay. I think that's a win. I personally have someone within my circle that fell on a hike recently and showed me a text about, oh, I fell on my knees and got back up and I'm a little sore, but I'm okay. I think the lifting that I've been doing all this year has been helping. And this person is mid 60s.
Yeah.
So I think they see the benefits really when those things happen. Because I mean, there's a higher chance of higher injury, like broken something, if you didn't have that, bone density and
Right.
really fall. So I think it was really good to see that message and kind of have them realize that the benefit of lifting at any age.
Yeah. And that's something we haven't mentioned yet is the bone density side of things. And that's a benefit that your athletes, I'm sure, they're seeing now. They don't recognize that as the outcome, but they are building peak bone mass levels that are going to set them up for such longevity down the line. That it's such a underappreciated takeaway of having a very strong muscular system means you've got a strong skeletal system as well.
Right. It's we want our athletes. High performance is a tricky one because we want, usually they want to perform to the best. They don't really think about longevity. Me as a practitioner who work with youth athletes and older, I see the whole spectrum. And first of all, I want my athletes to be performing at the highest level but for a long period of time. So that's the main thing. And also, I don't want them by the age of 60, 70 to have all those issues. So even though it's hard for them to understand that because they're really focusing on, I need to win this from having my experience with different type of population, I think I'm trying to bring that in a little bit.
Yeah, and again, that comes back to what we know and what they need to know. Right? We understand, and it was the same when we were protecting athletes from injury in the NHL. Like what we were doing was trying to win the next game, but what we were actually trying to do for the individual athlete is make sure that instead of having a 6-year career, they had a 12-plus-year career.
Right.
If people can stay healthy, that's what gives you longevity. It's how we created Vitality Collective. We just took that principle of extending athletic careers to extending the quality of people's lives in the general population.
Yeah.
And I think for women especially, it's such an important thing to recognize is the extension of quality years that we can get from going through this process that athletes go through and in building strength and power and resilience.
Yeah. I mean, think about Lindsay Vonn. She's one of the biggest athletes at Red Bull. She's 40 years old and she's going back to, she's going to go for the Olympics. Multiple injuries, multiple surgeries, still going after it.
Walk us through some of that process. Like, I know you may not be working with her personally,
Right.
but what does that look like for an athlete to go through that process with Red Bull and get back to the Olympics?
Yeah, I think for her specifically, Red Bull is really supporting her. She has a lot of people involved with her, system. I think I met her. I've talked to her multiple times as a person. She has a different mindset. I mean, there's not a lot of athletes in general after the amount of injuries and surgeries that she's gone through that will go back on the snow and try to go as fast as you can down the slope. So I've met with her, and it's a different mindset that she has, and it's interesting conversation with her.
Yeah, the team that you mentioned, she has a lot of people involved in that process. Again, we're Vitality Collective, and that means I don't have all the answers. It means we have a team of people who have overlapping collaborative and complementary skill sets who all surround the individual that we're working with. And that's the high performance setup is making sure that an athlete like Lindsay would have exactly what she needs to take her from the multiple injuries she's had through to the highest levels of performance, because it's too easy to be like, you've had all these injuries, don't bother, don't do it.
Yeah, right.
And for me, it's lazy. It's the easy way out to just say, "Oh, just don't do it." We responded to a post about deadlifting just the other day, and it was a couple of experts talking about when should you stop deadlifting. Why would I stop deadlifting? Like,
Yeah,
surely
why?
it's what's my limiting factor? Just like they were mentioning, like there's some age that you should stop deadlifting.
Was
And it's
it
really interesting
specific to
because
a like heavy load or just
just deadlifting.
deadlift?
When should I stop deadlifting?
Yeah, I
My
mean,
my
I've
oldest
had,
person that I have deadlifting right now is 85, 86 maybe.
yeah. I mean, you're always gonna have some people that'll tell athletes and your clients what to do, what not to do. Take an example of 16-year-old soccer player, and she got a lot of food issues, and she goes sees and trying to see different specialists, and one of them is telling her you cannot deadlift, you cannot do any hip thrust, but she's going to college. She's going to be lifting with the team. Well, in the first place, why is she not deadlifting? Why is she not hip thrusting? These are the big lifts that you need to be able to do. How you do it is
Right.
important, right? You got to make sure you do it properly. But telling a 16-year-old you cannot deadlift and you cannot do hip thrust, there's a lot of things that it's going on in her mind,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the whole point of the deadlift is that it's just a fundamental movement pattern, right? It's picking something up off the ground, is what it is. To be a little more crude, it's sitting on the toilet and getting up, right? But you are not allowed to live at home anymore at the point at which you can't get off the toilet. So essentially, that's deadlifting. And lifting your body weight is the important metric here. For some people, a 1 rep max deadlift is getting up.
mhm.
For other people, it's 1,000 pounds. It's all relative to the individual you're working with and the goal that they have. If that person wants to go from, I can just about get off the toilet, to I want to start deadlifting a heavy bar, there's a progression and there is what heavy actually looks like. It doesn't have to look like the absolute weight that we sort of think about it. It's just the movements of life, and we want to increase people's capacity in them.
Right. And if you cannot deadlift, and if you, because you're female and you cannot do zone 2 training and you cannot lift during your menstrual cycle, where are we going?
What's left?
What's left? The human body is meant to be moving, to be strong. Yes, strong is relative to its own individual, but you need to be able to, move some weight, move your body, exercise. There's no age for that.
Exactly right. The age is, when do you want to stop moving, right? And I don't think anybody ever wants to stop moving. That's the key marker for quality of life. And I just think it's such an important message to keep hammering. People are going to get so sick of hearing us talk about it, but
Yeah.
we cannot get away from these fundamental movements and being as strong as possible for as long as possible in the fundamental movements in order to be able to live with dignity and live a great quality of life and be around our community. So I think it's so important for women of all ages. If you think about all those things you lifted, for me to go and work out, it has to be in the right zone, heart rate zone. It has to be at the right phase of my cycle.
Don't do too
It
much upper body.
can't do too much upper body. Okay, so that's got to factor in. I've got to have eaten at the exact right time. Like, it's getting so hard with all of that for me to get a workout in. All these things I've got to consider. What message when your athletes are getting inundated with all this stuff when they're away from the APC?
Mhm.
What do you tell them?
I think the main thing for me is telling them that there's a bunch of research and people out there. It doesn't mean all of it is accurate. There's good research, there's bad research. There's good practitioner, there's bad practitioner. And I think the main thing for them is trusting the coach. It's like whoever you work with, trust them, challenge them, ask them question. If ask them question about where did you find that? Like, can you show me? I've had athletes asking me for articles about training load, having those conversation, and kind of explaining about how there's so much going on, right? Let's focus on evidence-based, good research, right? And how this is working. It's been working for years. Let's not try to change the wheel. We just try not to reinvent the wheels. It's been there for years. The human body hasn't changed within the last 20 years. The biomechanic hasn't changed. There's just more research. Sometimes more research is not the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then oftentimes we'll go back to the really old research. And then it hasn't changed. Same with the way you run, the way you cut, the muscle that we're using that when we're stepping up a bench. So I think building that trust with the athletes is a key point.
Yeah. And then I tell people, though I comment all the time on the load management thing, is remember when we used to train really hard and get in great shape to play our sport? Right, that was what we did, right? You lifted weights, you got really strong, you ran really hard and made sure you were in shape for the game. You practiced your sport a lot. And when you went out and played the game, you felt great. And those, for me, are the fundamentals, and they bleed into every area of life.
Yeah.
Or training for anything. You want to play tennis recreationally, play tennis, and do the things that are required to support it. And those are lift weights, eat right, sleep, do some plyometric training.
Right.
And you'll be fine.
Yeah. I think the challenging part that I've seen in the rehab is that this person is saying that you have the knee over the toes guy, you have the glutes guy, you have the hamstring guy. They do that. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying that whatever they do, that might not be working for you right now at this phase of your rehab. And again, there's so much information. So an athlete's coming with all this information, and you can tell that he doesn't know what to believe. So again, I'm trying to explain to them, like this might work for them, or might work for these athletes, but for you right now at this phase, based on what we see and the weakness that we see based on the profile, this is what you need to focus on. The best exercise for you right now, it's this. Yeah, there's thousands of exercises. Which one is the right one for you? Which one is the right program for you?
Here's the one thing people can use to filter that noise. If somebody is called the glutes guy or the knees over the toes guy, they are trying to sell you something, period. If somebody is the guy for something that specific, I don't know, that they're trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, there are merits to training your glutes. Yes, we can take our knees over our toes. But like that's your thing. Like that's just a movement pattern. That's just a muscle group. Right? If we're thinking globally, if somebody is thinking about the system and the outcomes, like what does the glute guy have to do with playing soccer? Right? No kidding, you need to train your glutes, but it's one muscle in a whole system.
Right.
And these are the things that we've got to bear in mind. Is what are the outcomes we're going for? Now, if it's aesthetics and you just want great glutes, go see the glute guy. That'll do it for you.
Lots of information out there. But yeah, just try to keep it simple for my athletes. Even I do feel like sometimes we give too much information when we do profiling, and just try to make it make sense for them. Try to be digestible, make it make sense. How can they relate to what they do outside of here?
Mm-hmm. And so with every episode, we try and give people 3 takeaways. The 3 things that people should focus on that they can implement in their life right away. What should women listening to this episode focus on? What are the 3 things that you would like them to take away in order to really get the results they're trying to get?
I think for female athletes specifically, be consistent with your training. I think it's the main thing. That's how you're going to get your outcome. Try to increase, challenge yourself a little bit on a weekly basis. Some week you're going to feel like, my one arm, 1 week might differ from the next week. So listen to your body in terms of fatigue. Some week you're going to be able to push, and some week you're going to have to kind of deload. And it's okay as long as over a period of time, you can do this, right? I want to look at, week 1, week 0, and then week 12, how much I've done. And this, you're going to get that by consistency in your training. You can lift, some because you feel that you cannot lift, you can lift, you're strong, sometimes stronger, and often stronger than male in the gym. You're powerful, you're more resilient, so you are capable of doing as much, even more than the male athletes. There's no question.
Outstanding. And so where can people find out more about your work, follow along with you?
I don't publish much, but I do have a Instagram account, so you can find some of my information and training philosophy there. It's SMT Performance with lower dash.
Okay. Well, so I'll make sure that is in the show notes, and people can follow along with everything you do. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. You've got a busy day there at the APC with the athletes, so thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great conversation. Thank you.
That was an incredible conversation with Sofia Smati, whose grounded, no-nonsense approach to high-performance coaching cuts through the noise. Here are the 3 key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, train the person, not the gender. Individual needs, goals, and context matter far more than whether somebody is male or female. Number 2, consistency is everything. Outcomes in strength, resilience, and longevity come from showing up and progressing week to week, not from chasing trendy protocols. Number 3, strong is simple. Whether you're training Olympians or someone in their 60s, the fundamentals, lift, recover, eat well, and move with intent, are what create results. If this episode resonated with you, and you're looking to build a system around these principles, whether for performance or longevity, we'd love to support you. At Vitality Collective, we've combined individualized assessment and strength-based strategies to help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. To learn more and take the next step, visit www.vitality-collective.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.